Welcome along to the Other Races web preview of the Stan James Champion Hurdle, the feature race on day one of the festival. We're going to be having a look at some of the key contenders very shortly, but first off, we can welcome along Mick Fitzgerald, the winner of no less than 14 races at the festival.
Oh, come on, every time I think of that, I think, well, actually, I probably didn't have too bad a career, but there was plenty of them in there I feel got away. So any day that any jockey rides a winner at the festival is a big day for them.
And we'll look at the Champion Hurdle picture in a second, find out what Mick would like to be riding if he were still in the saddle. Let's have a look at the key contenders for this year's renewal of the Stan James Champion Hurdle. Hurricane Fly top of the market at 7-4, Zarkandar at 5-1, Rock on Ruby, last year's winner, at 6-1, Grand Duet at 8-1, Binocular at 12s, Cinders and Ashes at 14s, 16 for Countrywide Flame, and also for Oscar Whiskey. So the market maker very much revolving around Hurricane Fly. Won it 2 years ago, beaten favourite last year. The big question many people asking, can he regain the title?
I think there's no doubt he can. His price probably reflects that, Martin. The thing for me is I feel some of Willie's horses weren't quite right last year at the festival. And it was amazing looking at Hurricane Fly and having seen him the previous year in the flesh as well. I didn't think he looked the same horse. And that certainly seemed to be the case as they were going round. I know Ted Walsh afterwards felt that Ruby was too far out of his ground, and Ruby said I was too far out of my ground because I wasn't travelling well enough to improve my position. And that's the big thing at Cheltenham. You need a horse to actually jump straight into the bridle, and that's what Hurricane Fly normally does. But last year he didn't, and the others got away. Rock on Ruby had a real flyer down the hill, and Hurricane just never got to him. But I don't, no matter which way you look at it, a Hurricane Fly in tip-top form is able to pick those horses up. And for me, I think you've just got to write off last year, look at the previous year, and look at the form he's been in this year coming into the race. He's been in imperious form, and I think it'll be a very brave book. He stood there with their satchel open, ready to try and take this dead on. We're watching him here beating Binocular. Now, I actually think this was quite a good run by Binocular. 1,000 Stars is always a good yardstick, and I think you can almost set your clock by him. And this is what you've got to look at this performance of Hurricane Fly and say, well, he's beaten 1,000 Stars like we know he's capable of doing. And Ruby felt that Hurricane Fly was as good as he ever was.
It looks like he's barely out of second gear. It's as if the horse just joined in off that last bend and is beating two rivals who run 3 miles.
But that's the difference. That's what I'm saying to you about being able to side through the field in a champion hurdle. You need that sort of natural speed and ability. That's what this fella has, and that's what makes his job easy. Such a fluent jumper as well. And if you take away one of those things, he's nowhere near as good a horse. And
would it be one of the most consistent champion hurdlers you've seen? In 14 Grade 1s. His overall record does mark him down as being quite exceptional.
Yeah, it does, but, let's not get carried away. He's not an Istabrack. He's not won 3 of them. So until he's got several of those rosettes pinned up on his wall, you can't really call him a true champion.
And I think his preparation this year has been much smoother as well. And as you say, overall last year, Willie's horses maybe, or some of them weren't in top form at the festival, but this fella didn't come back in till late last year. He started off earlier. He's won all 3 of his races, so it's very hard to fault the way he's going into Cheltenham this time round.
Well, no, exactly. And he's had to do it a few different ways as well. He's had to be ridden handy. We know he's better coming from off the pace. And I think he should be guaranteed to get that this year, and I think he's a worthy favourite. And
it's been interesting looking at Binocular. His record of the champion hurdle is quite remarkable. He's been there, he's been beaten, he's won, he's missed it and been beaten again. But just listening to Nicky Henderson talk at the minute, the one horse, aside from the real superstars like Sprinter Sacre, that seems to have him excited is Binocular.
Yeah, and there was a lot made of that ride at Leopardstown. But for me, if you look at the finishing position, he was beaten 5.5 lengths by Hurricane Fly. He's not beaten 15.5 lengths. And Nicky left a lot to work on. And I think you'll see a much fitter, sharper horse when he runs at Cheltenham. And for me, I think this fella could represent a little bit of value. He's too big a price, really, for what he's done.
And in terms of a 9-year-old in the champion hurdle, I think only one in the last 10 years, that was Rooster Booster. Is 9 sort of pushing the boundaries?
I don't think so. I don't think there's much mileage on that clock. So for me, I wouldn't let that put you off.
OK, so positive words for Binocular as well. The second favourite, though, in the betting is Zarkandar. He was beaten in the race last year, and he's trained by Paul Nicholls.
He's won 7 from 9. He's won 2 at Cheltenham. The only time he wasn't right last year was in the champion hurdle when the yard were coughing and he was ill after he'd won the Betfair hurdle. Done nothing wrong this year. He's won 3 from 3. He's workmanlike, just does enough, but you just wouldn't know what was in the locker.
That's it. I was at Wincanton watching him. You're exactly right. He's never really travelling, but you always feel there's plenty there.
But he'd always travel to the race a little bit. He sort of goes around dossing, really, not concentrating and having an easy time. And believe it or not, he went round there on that heavy ground on Sunday. You wouldn't know he'd had a race. He's just come back, air tap. It was like a day out to him. And it's good. He's going, you know, one thing with him, he keeps on winning, and he does gallop up that Cheltenham Hill.
I'm a big Hurricane Fly fan, Mick, but Zarkandar, his overall record, 5 wins from 7. The only 2 times he's been beaten in the race last year when he finished like a train up that hill. Yeah,
he did, but I think he's a little bit ground dependent, Martin, and I think a lot of people who are Zarkandar fans, they'll be doing a weather watch leading up to the festival. Because I think if you see the description soft in the going, this fella's a player, because it'll turn into a real stamina test. Let nobody forget that 2 mile on the old course is a sharp 2 mile. It's a different track completely on the new course, where there's a lot more emphasis on stamina. So for me, this horse will be at his very best if we see soft in the going description.
And that's probably a point borne out when we look back to the International Hurdle at Christmas time. He looked as though he was the first one beaten, but as the stamina came into play, he was the one that was the strongest stayer.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I can't emphasise enough. I think the weather is the key to this fella. Whereas, I think you've got to look at Grandaway as well. He got beaten by Zarkandar, but I think a lot of that was down to the stamina factor and the fact that if there's good ground in the description, for me, I think Grandaway represents the value.
Well, let's have a look at that race, in fact, as well. We can look back to earlier on the season, because when Grandaway was beaten by Zarkandar, there was also amongst that 3 was the reigning champion hurdler, Rock on Ruby. He, of course, now trained by Harry Fry, last year trained by Paul Nicholls, and this was the awful day up at Doncaster where we lost Darlan. But Rock on Ruby went on to win, and I guess in terms of a champion hurdle preparation, he's done all that could be asked.
Yeah, I think this fella, he really has slipped under the radar for me, because let's not forget the fact that Darlan looked like he was going to throw down a very serious challenge going to the last, but it wasn't a done deal by any stage. And for me, the fact that this horse was still banged there, he gave it a comprehensive beating, as we see here, to Countrywide Flame. I think this fella, he's been almost disregarded by everybody as it was a fluke winner. Let's forget about it. But if you look through his form as a racehorse, it's pretty impressive. Good record around Cheltenham. He got very narrowly beaten in the Neptune by First Lieutenant. And for me, I think, if you're looking for a horse that's going to be bang there when they jump the last, this is it.
And that's a very fair point to make. He does slip under the radar, and people do kind of think, well, Hurricane Fly wasn't at his best last year. He was fortunate to win, but his overall profile would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I think he's a pretty rock solid horse, and Harry Fry is he's making a great fist of it now out on his own. He's made no bones about it. He thinks this horse has improved, and he's been training him purely with the champion hurdle in mind. So I think this fella's a player.
Well, that's the last year's winner, Rock on Ruby. Horse who was in winning festival at the festival last year, of course, was Countrywide Flame. He was in behind on that occasion, but we can see him here, Mick, winning the fighting 5th.
Yeah, and we can see Cinders and Ashes finishing second to him here. Many people felt that Cinders and Ashes would win this day, but I think, again, this was soft ground. And Countrywide Flame, he absolutely dotted up here. And this was a very good performance. But I just think, for me, stamina. This fella will need the ground to be soft to be a player at the festival. And for me, I think he's booked for a place at best on what we've seen so far. But Cinders and Ashes is an interesting one. He's another one who comes into the reckoning if the ground is good, because he showed a smart turn of foot last year when he won the Supreme. I love horses that have already done it at Cheltenham. There is no... well, you can't get away from it. It's there in the form book, and if you've got one that likes it round that place, because there is no hiding place when you run at the festival, and this fella, he doesn't need any second look.
And we touched on Cinders and Ashes. I know he's been beaten a couple of times this year, but both times on a very testing surface, and Donald McCain really does seem to be keeping the faith with this horse.
Yeah, he is, and I think it's significant that he hasn't run him as well. He doesn't want to get him blunted by running him on bad ground again. So, it's a brave shout by the trainer not to run him, but like you say, he's lost no faith in the horse, and he thinks that given good ground and a truly run race at the festival on the opening day, he thinks this horse could figure in the champion.
And just to touch on, you'd mentioned Grandaway as well. He's only had, I think, the 1 run so far this season. He's missed another run with a slight interrupted preparation, but a Grade 1 winner as a juvenile.
Yeah, very good, and he looked good that day when he won at Punchestown as well. This is a very smart turn of foot against some decent horses. You got the likes of Unaccompanied in there as well. But I just think, for me, this horse has to have good ground. If he gets good ground, he will turn into the straight running away in a champion hurdle, because that's how easily this horse travels in his races and how much he's a very slick jumper. And I just think that for me, he was the value in the race a little while ago, because everybody was getting carried away with soft and heavy ground. Some of the trials have been run this year, and that's all we've had to go on. But if you get good ground, this horse will turn in with a chance.
And as well, if you look at collateral form as well, he beat Overturned, didn't he, at Cheltenham about 18 months ago, and he was second in the champion hurdle last year. So the form is there. So there are the best prices. We've looked at some of the key contenders. 7-4 for Hurricane Fly, Zarkandar's at 5, Rock on Ruby at 6, Grand Duet at 8, Binocular at 12. It's 14 bar those. Just a quick selection, Mick, before we finish.
I'm a Hurricane Fly fan. I think, if he comes back to his best, he'll be very hard to beat. But Grand Duet, for me, represents the value, especially if we get some good ground.